Welcome to the President's Roundtable. Today I'm speaking with Colin Keating, who is the Executive Director of Security Council Report. Ambassador Keating is from New Zealand, has had a distinguished career in the Foreign Ministry and in the Justice Ministry, and in 1994 was President of the Security Council as New Zealand's ambassador to the UN. And we all know that was a fateful month in the life of Rwanda, where a terrible genocide began to unfold. In reflecting back on that period, Ambassador Keating has written, "I believe that the Rwanda experience proves that the United Nations must drastically improve the quality of the background information received by members of the Security Council about situations that come before them. It is clear with hindsight that even in 1993, the situation in Rwanda was much more complex and dangerous than was ever indicated to members of the Council. It is true that the Secretariat followed existing conventions in reporting to the Council, and the sources of information were limited. But there were a very large number of people in academia, in non-governmental organizations, and in private life, and in the UN agencies who knew much more about Rwanda. Had the Council been exposed to a slice of this wisdom, it might have proceeded quite differently at a later time when confronted with a crisis." Now, with that as a very powerful statement, tell us about SCR and what it does and how its work speaks to the information deficit that you spoke of in your own life experience.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Fanton. It's a great privilege to be associated with MacArthur Foundation and with this project, which you personally played an important role in establishing. And you're right, yes, I was moved to take on this job in this new organisation largely because of that experience. It left me with an indelible history of what went wrong and a lot of things that one could do to avoid it ever happening again. But one in particular, one niche that needed to be filled was getting quality, timely information regularly before the decision makers and beginning to give them the opportunity to look outside the square and begin to look at the underlying reasons for why the conflict was there. So it took no persuading of me that the idea behind Security Council report was a necessary and good one. I was really felt privileged to have the opportunity to build it up from nothing and now have it in a full-fledged form.
I was looking at the web statistics the other day and was pleased to see that 100,000 hits were recorded on the SCR website just in the month of January. Where is that interest coming from? Who's using SCR?
Well, one of the great things, of course, is that is a 100% increase in the 12 months to the beginning of 2008, which is really encouraging. And I think it reflects the fact that it's now not only the 15 Security Council members that are using Security Council report and their capitals and ministries in their capitals, but also a lot of interest amongst the wider membership of the UN, the other countries that want to influence events in the Security Council or are affected by them. And beyond that also the NGO community. There's a big community of organisations out there representing and advocating on behalf of the ordinary people in the world who are gravely affected by mass atrocities or deprivation or humanitarian crises. And they are increasingly wanting to make the voice of civil society reflected in the Security Council. And of course, access to information has been one of their biggest barriers as well. So we know that for them this is a huge asset. But beyond that, I know also the academic community, and we've put a lot of effort into building links with academic community, not only here in the United States but around the world, and increasingly scholars and students and researchers are using what we produce, because it is actually the only window into the Security Council that's really accessible to outsiders. So this has gone, I think, way beyond our original vision as to what we might be able to achieve.
When we began SCR, one of our primary motivations was to supply good information to smaller countries, elected members of the Security Council. Can you tell us about the kinds of questions you're getting from elected members and how you handle those questions? What are some of the issues where you've been able to be helpful?
Well, what we're finding is that one of the biggest deficits that elected members face is the shortness of their term. 2 years is a very short term, and their relative lack of ability to prepare. Quite often, if there's a contested election, a member doesn't know until maybe the end of November whether or not it's going to be on the Security Council the 1st of January following year. And so one of the most important requests we've had is to help prepare them for the kinds of issues that they will be having to deal with in the Council. And not only the current situation relating to, say, North Korea or Iran or the DRC or the Middle East, because there's a sense in which there's only so much preparation you can do on each of those issues, because the problems you will encounter in January are almost impossible to predict in July of the previous year. But what you can learn is the skills and experience about how the Council operates, what its working methods are, how you influence it, how you're able to make initiatives, and these are the sorts of things which we've had a lot of interest from. Each year, the incoming 5 Council members chance to get up to speed before they take their seat.
The SCR also does cross-cutting reports in addition to your monthly forecast. What have been some of the topics on which you've gone in depth?
Well, we think it's important not only to look ahead as to what's coming up on a monthly basis in the Security Council, but also to be able to look back to the way in which the Security Council has handled various issues and track that in the light of its decisions at a thematic or generic level on matters of principle. For instance, the Security Council adopts resolutions on the need to protect civilians in armed conflict, or the need to prevent children being involved as child soldiers or being caught up in conflict, or the generic problems of disarmament of combatants and their reintegration into society, or the problems of small arms. These sorts of things are often the subject of debate in the Security Council. It adopts resolutions or statements, often very high-flowing and high-principled statements, but nobody ever really tracks whether or not they then carry that out when they come to deal with specific conflicts, whether they're actually applying that when they look at Timor-Leste, or when they look at the conflict in Georgia, or when they look at the situation in Kosovo. Are they really applying what they have committed to? And in this sense, we produce this series of cross-cutting reports, because we call them cross-cutting because they bring a cross-cutting analysis from the thematic to each of the individual issues on the agenda. And if you do that in a systematic way, year after year, showing how the council is performing in terms of its stated objectives, then you're producing a baseline against which the advocacy community or the academic community or the media can increasingly hold the Security Council accountable in terms of what it's promised as against what it's delivered.
Now, holding accountable often means increasing levels of discomfort. Has there been any criticism of SCR or any pushback because of its reports?
Security Council report is not the one that is doing the holding accountable. It's providing the material, but it's not firing the bullets. And I think the audience we are dealing with, the policymakers and the diplomats, are very sophisticated. They understand the distinction between what we're doing, how we're doing it in a responsible and balanced way so that everybody's side of the story gets heard. And that at the end of the day, if there are others who then pick up that material and use it to make criticism, they'll then deal with that criticism on its merits. If people use the criticism in an unbalanced or irresponsible way, then I guess they'll get pushback. But so far as Security Council report is concerned, the feedback's clear. People are happy with what we're doing and the way we're doing it.
Good. As you look back on the first few years of Security Council report, can you point to any impact that it has had on the working methods of the UN, or indeed on any particular issue?
I think it's clear that we are already having an impact in terms of some of the initial goals, which was to enable the 15 Security Council members as a whole to be on the same page with respect to the issues before them. I think there was a sense of frustration in the past with some of the elected members, or all of the elected members, suspecting that things were going on behind their back, and that pressures were being applied on some and not others, and that all in all the processes were not transparent. And this had led to a whole strand of argument in the debate about reform of the Security Council, that the Security Council was illegitimate and needed to be more transparent if it was to recover its credibility. Now, I think what we've seen already is a significant moderation of that criticism. Everybody, I think, now recognises that what Security Council report has contributed is the kind of transparency that they had been hoping for. It's not transparency which has been delivered by the members. It's been delivered by a private organisation, but working intimately with the members. And I think the sophistication of the audience is such that they know that we couldn't do what we do if the 15 members, and the permanent members in particular, didn't talk to us and share a lot of information, and we couldn't test that information against what others say and then print something which is a composite of what everyone has said. Now, that I think has removed a source of grievance, and it's removed a sort of source of criticism. And we can already see a lowering of the temperature on the transparency debate. Quite apart from all the good things that council members say about how much better informed they feel.
Would it be accurate to say that SCR may be reducing the pressure for reform of the Security Council and the UN?
Yes and no.
Or on the other hand, might it be increasing?
In that one respect I've just mentioned, I think probably yes. But But in other respects, one of the things we're doing is highlighting other weaknesses in the working methods of the Security Council. And for instance, a recent report about the oversight and management of peacekeeping operations gave a very detailed analysis of the problems that are there with the working methods the Council has adopted in managing peacekeeping, including right back to its performance in the period in the 1990s with respect to Rwanda and other crises. Now, I think that this is not only giving currency to those who argue that reform is needed, but it's also helping them to crystallise the problem and begin to find solutions. And this is again another important role that we play. We don't make recommendations as to how things should be reformed, but by analysing the nature of the problem, we make it easier for those who do have concrete proposals.
As you recall, MacArthur was privileged at the request of the Government of Canada to support the International Commission on Intervention in State Sovereignty that articulated the concept of the responsibility to protect, later endorsed at a UN summit. I've noticed the Secretary General has issued a report on the status of R2P, as we call it, and I gather there will be a debate coming up in the General Assembly about the responsibility to protect. How do you believe that debate will unfold? What will the issues be?
Well, I think the Secretary General has given a very good foundation for a discussion. It's intellectually a strong report, but it's also represents a really important process of political consultation before being issued. Nobody can say that the Secretary General didn't, through his staff, take a lot of effort to incorporate ideas and preview his positions with all of the groups of the General Assembly and indeed more broadly with civil society. So I think it's off to as good a start as you could hope at this point in time. I think also the report coming as it does in 2009 in the aftermath of the financial crisis, in the aftermath of the really important political changes with the new administration in Washington and its different approach to foreign policy, it falls into a more fertile field than might have been the case if it had been produced a year or 2 years ago. And the financial crisis is given a sense of urgency to the need for change. The need for change in the architecture of the international community and how it deals with not only financial problems, but I suspect also broader problems. How you make the institutions work better. And if you're spending the amount of money that is being spent, for instance, at the moment on peacekeeping, $7 billion a year, and you think, couldn't we conceive of a situation in which we might spend a portion of that on prevention and not having to send the peacekeepers in the first place? Prevention is always a lot cheaper than cure. And we have the opportunity at this point in time for some change, and this report feeds into a hopefully more optimistic environment. I think it may in the end play out in a balanced and sensible way, and that most member states will be comfortable with where the Secretary General is at and what he's proposing as a way of improving the capacity of the UN system for more early warning, and that will be a good thing. It doesn't need to cost a lot of money, as I say, to engage in some prevention rather than cure.
As you know, MacArthur has been working to advance the evolution of a system of international justice where there would be venues outside of a country when a national court system fails to deliver justice and accountability. We've supported the International Criminal Court, regional human rights courts and commissions in Europe and the Americas and now in Africa, as well as the UN human rights agencies. As we look at a record being compiled by these tribunals and the International Criminal Court itself, Milosevic on trial, died before it was over, but at least brought to account. Charles Taylor in the special tribunal for Sierra Leone, the hybrid tribunal in Cambodia about to start its first trial, the ICC beginning its first trial coming out of events in the Congo, arrest warrants issued for Joseph Kony of the LRA, a referral and a charge perhaps resulting in an indictment of the president of Sudan, although that's still an open question. This is beginning to be a record that suggests that those who commit horrible crimes can't get off scot-free. Where do you see the system of international justice going, and do you believe it is a reasonable hope that this accumulation of cases will have a deterrent effect in the future?
Well, I come to this question as a person who was in on this at the very beginning. I was personally very much involved in both the policy and the law relating to the tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, and then the tribunal for Rwanda. And in both of those cases, for me and for my country, these were important responses to failure. Failure of the system to prevent, but failure on the part of individuals to live up to important responsibilities, failure to observe the law, and the ability of the international community to respond to that and bring justice to bear as a deterrent factor. Not only dealing with the offenders that are currently known, but also sending out an important message about the lack of impunity in the future, was really right there, central to what was motivating us in the Security Council in 1993 on Yugoslavia and 1994 on Rwanda. And this followed a period in which I had been very much involved in the legal aspects of the work of the then International Law Commission draft of a statute for the International Criminal Court. For New Zealand, this had become a really important issue because of an experience we had in the mid 1980s with a case involving France, in which some French agents came to New Zealand and blew up a Greenpeace ship called the Rainbow Warrior. And the New Zealand police arrested 2 of the agents. And we were left with a remarkable problem of exercising national jurisdiction in circumstances where the politics surrounding a situation of that sort would have been so much easier to manage if there had been an international tribunal that had jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. It would have taken out of play a lot of the otherwise impossible politics surrounding the situation. And so we became strong converts to the idea of international justice mechanisms. And during the early 1990s, the ICC draft was slowly working its way through the machinery of the UN. And then we were on the Security Council in 93, 94, and had the opportunity to bring that thinking to bear and strongly supporting the idea of institutions to deal with individual criminal responsibility in Yugoslavia and then Rwanda. And of course, when you now look back and you see that whole list of cases, including another one which will start in about 3-4 weeks' time, the new tribunal for Lebanon. So the picture is just so much broader than it was before, and it leaves a much stronger sense that that decision makers around the world have to be much more cognizant when they issue orders to deal with what they perceive as problems and use force. The consequences of doing that are now different from what they were 10 or 20 years ago. And I think this is a huge development for the better.
We may have seen both the responsibility to protect and the benefits of deterrence of which you speak at play in the recent tension in Kenya over the contested election, where the international community stepped in by sending Kofi Annan there to mediate successfully as it happened. And it may well be that the two sides understood that had they inflamed passions among their supporters and civil war and ethnic strife resulted, they themselves would be liable now that there is this international system of justice. So it may well be that we're beginning to see the prevention side of all this as well. Do you think the U.S. might join the International Criminal Court coming up, and has the change of administration, even in these early weeks, been felt in the UN?
Well, it seems to me that at some point in time that's an issue that the United States needs to address as to whether or not its concerns about legitimate protection of United States citizens can be met within the terms of the statute of the court. For my part, I think huge efforts were made at the drafting to ensure that there should be no reasonable concerns. But that's a decision, that's a bridge which still has to be crossed. I think the important thing in the short term is that even if the United States is not a party to it and doesn't subject its own personnel in the short term to the purview of the court's jurisdiction, we've already begun to see a huge change in terms of US attitude towards the utility of the court in a number of cases. And this important change occurred, I think, under the Bush administration, which began to recognize that the existence of the court was an important piece of leverage in dealing with a problem like Darfur. And that it created a benchmark in terms of behavior of political decision makers that was really significant. And it was, the important thing about this is it is a benchmark which can be brought to bear without the threat of the use of force. And I think it's been the prospect or the fear about the threat of the use of force which has led a number of countries in the Security Council and many outside it to be hesitant about where the agenda relating to Darfur was leading. But what we can now see is that the court is playing an important role establishing benchmarks, and that plays into long-term deterrence as well.
And let me ask you one last question. You have had a distinguished career, been in many important places, difficult challenges. You have a sense of history. Where would you say we were on the arc of history? Are you optimistic about the future? Pessimistic? How is your own mood evolving?
Well, I guess in my life I've always been an optimist, or I would never have taken some of the opportunities that have come my way, both personally and in terms of political issues. And I think that said, this is really a time where we ought to be thinking optimistically. We have just had an experience as a result of the financial crisis, which is going to impact on almost everybody in the world, human beings as well as institutions. And it is going to stimulate either good things or bad things. And I think as far as the international architecture is concerned, we've actually got a real opportunity. And why I say it's an opportunity is that the first time for a long time, we are confronted with a situation in which a solution of throwing money at the problem is simply not available, and everyone knows that. That it's not possible to say, well, look, just give us some more money and we'll fix the problem. We therefore have to actually ask more fundamental questions about what it is that we are doing, that we could do better with the resources we've got, and what it is we can do better in terms of decision making and processes and methods of decision making internationally. That will get focus on the things that will make a difference. That will get focus on prevention rather than response. That will get focus on peace building so that we don't lapse back into conflict once the peacekeepers go away. And that will actually, in the end, ensure the kind of justice that we were just talking about. I think these things are the diagnosis of what we need to do is pretty well understood and clear. And what we don't have at the moment is the structures that release the resources in the right time with the right priority to go to the sources that actually really need interventions of a peaceful kind as opposed to a military kind. And I think the fact that we have got this coincidence of the financial crisis, of an historic political change in the United States that gives people in the US a sense of optimism and around the world a sense of optimism. I think this is a coincidence that is that's made for some positive developments. And we have often heard it said that, by pessimists, that we only got the United Nations because of the catastrophe of the Second World War. And it's unreasonable to expect that we can reform the United Nations in any fundamental way in the absence of some similar kind of overwhelming stimulus. Well, I think the financial crisis is the kind of stimulus that maybe will give the push to get some change. The question now is for leaders to seize the opportunity and make some time to not just focus on their domestic crises, but also recognise that part of the solution to their domestic crises is actually fixing the international architecture as well. There were some very good signs of that back in September, and there was a summit convened in Washington by President Bush on reforming the international financial architecture. And I think that's shades of the direction where things can and should now begin to head.
Well, we thank you for those thoughtful, perceptive, and optimistic comments, and we thank you for the leadership you're giving to Security Council report, which in a short period has become a trusted, indeed indispensable source of information within the UN and indeed for the general public. I've been talking with Ambassador Colin Keating, who's been a guest at the MacArthur Foundation's President's Roundtable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's been a great partnership with MacArthur Foundation as well.